Before today's video, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest videos. If you want to see a case or topic covered by Paranormally Listed, then go to criminallylisted.com and fill out the questionnaire under the Suggest a Case tab. On the remote beaches of Grand Marais, Michigan, nestled along Lake Superior's vast southern shore, a strange phenomenon occurs. Hikers and campers report a soft humming, a squeak beneath their feet, even a strange song echoing across the dunes. The locals call it the Singing Sands. But for some, it's more than a sound, it's a presence. Some say it's the land itself trying to speak. Others believe it's something far older and deeper, echoing from beneath the surface, waiting to be heard. Lake Superior is the largest and deepest of the Great Lakes, and arguably the most mysterious. Its shores are wild, windswept, and often empty, especially in the upper peninsula of Michigan. The beach just east of Grand Marais is known for its unusual golden and gentle dunes. What makes it curious is what happens when you walk on it. It hums. Not always, only under very specific conditions. When the sand is dry, the weather is calm, and your steps are firm, then with each musical step, a musical, squeaky, or droning sound rises up, as though something beneath the surface is stirring. In the 1960s, scientists began studying these singing sands. Most experts attribute the phenomenon to friction between uniform grains of quartz, shaped by centuries of wind and water. But even the experts admitted some sounds can be explained. According to local Ojibwe legend, passed down through the Grand Marais band, the sands once cried out in sorrow. May Redfeather, a young Anishinaabe woman, lived in the early 1800s. Her trapper husband drowned during a sudden squall on Lake Superior. Every day May walked the beach where he last departed, singing softly to the lake in hopes it would return him. After her death, the beach continued singing. The elder said that her soul had passed into the sand, leaving behind a melody of longing and grief. To this day, some say that if you walk on the beach alone at sunset, you might hear a soft feminine voice in the wind and footsteps in the sand that don't match your own. Geologists have studied the singing sands for decades. Most agree it's a mix of dry grains, uniform size, and friction that causes the vibrations. Some beaches in California, Wales, and even the Gobi Desert produce similar effects, but none are quite like the Grand Marais. Today, hikers still explore the remote dunes of the Grand Marais. Whether it's science, spirit, or both, the singing sands of Lake Superior remain an unsolved mystery. So if you ever find yourself walking on the Grand Marais shoreline at dusk, listen carefully. If something earns the nickname Japan's Atlantis, it's probably really cool. And that is the case for the Yonaguni monument, which can be found close to Yonaguni Island in Japan. The incredible rock structure was discovered underwater in the mid-1980s by a scuba diver, and mystery has surrounded it ever since. The rock is a ziggurat type of formation. Ziggurat means a pyramid-style tower formation. It's 82 feet underwater, 197 feet long, and 65 feet wide. What's interesting about this formation is that it appears to have carvings on it. It's believed that the structure is between 5,000 to 10,000 years old. No one knows exactly what the formation is or how it came to be. There are many theories as to what exactly this structure could have been used for, who made it, and of course, how they made it. There are two main differing perspectives as to how the structure was made. There's the group that argues it was man-made versus those who believe it was naturally occurring. Let's delve deeper into the evidence supporting these two theories. Let's start with the perspective that the formation is naturally occurring. This has been explained by claiming it was created by water currents, and over years and years it created the formation. If you're wondering about how they explain away those carvings, well, it's quite simple. They argue that what appear to be carvings are simply scratches. There's no special language or communication, just the regular wear and tear of ocean life. What about the fact that it looks like the rocks were formed into a specific structure? Well, they have an answer for that as well. They say it may look like a group of rocks, but it's really one solid piece of stone. And according to the experts, if it's one rock rather than a group of rocks, it's more likely to have occurred naturally. Furthermore, the rock formation has also been compared to similar naturally occurring rock formations, namely Giant's Causeway, found in Northern Ireland. This formation was created by volcanic eruption. So, as a lawyer would say, a precedent supports this argument. Now, for the other theory, that it is a human-made formation. Specifically, it was part of an underwater ancient city. Those who subscribe to this mentality think this ancient water city was home to a lost civilization, namely the Mu or the Lemura. Others posit that it was created by the Jomon people. The Jomon people lived in the area around 12,000 BC and were a prehistoric population in Japan. Of course, those who agree with this perspective believe it's human-made due to the structure's shape, which includes straight lines and edges. And they see those carvings as carvings and not scratches. Whatever camp you fall into, it's clear that this formation has intrigued people for decades, and it's easy to see why. But of course, we're rooting for the underwater Atlantis of Japan. Gokwe is a large town in Zimbabwe, a country in Southeast Africa. The town has a population of around 33,000. In 2012, local workers were constructing a new reservoir for the area. A reservoir was needed for fresh water for drinking and farmland. But then the workers refused to work. They claimed that they had seen mermaids, and the mermaids had sabotaged their equipment. Mermaids play an important role in the folklore of Zimbabwe and Africa. Many people in Zimbabwe do not think that they are mythical creatures. Instead, they are sure they exist. Zimbabwe's spiritual beliefs are a mix of Christianity and traditional African beliefs. In their culture, mermaids are mischievous water spirits that wreak havoc in the water. They especially like dams and reservoirs. In some versions of the mermaid mythology, they usually target men. There are stories of mermaids pulling people underwater, but those people may not be doomed. If their loved ones do not cry on shore, then they will be returned to the surface. But if the person is not returned and their family does not mourn them properly, the victims return to land as spirits. There have been many sightings of mermaids in reservoirs and dams in Zimbabwe. People have seen them lure animals and children into the water and drown them. One incident in 2017 made headlines in the country. 2 boys in Gokwe drowned under mysterious circumstances. The boys were herding cattle near the Pachamurovi Dam. Witnesses said the boys saw a big fish and went to grab it. Then a mermaid pulled them into the water. At first, the boys managed to free themselves. Then the boys' parents arrived, and they cried because their sons had nearly died. Suddenly, the boys were pulled back into the water by the mermaid, and they drowned. The police investigating the case couldn't find any solid leads, but the witnesses swear that mermaids killed the boys. In 2012, when people stopped working on the reservoir, Samuel Sepepa Nakoma, the country's Minister of Water Resources, Development and Management, addressed the Senate. He said, quote, "I do not believe in mermaids, but the community that lives in the area does," unquote. Project managers even attempted to hire other workers to continue the work. The men, who were described as being white, did not have previous knowledge of the mermaids. but they stopped working because they claimed they had seen the mermaids. The Gokwe Reservoir wasn't the first project that was halted after a suspected mermaid invasion. Mermaids supposedly shut down another dam project in the eastern town of Mutare. In this case, divers vowed never to return after investigating pipe blockages. The project only resumed after local healers conducted a traditional dance and brewed special beer as an offering to the mermaids. The workers of the Gokwe project took a similar route, ensuring the project restarted. It was finally completed in 2016, 6 years after the project started. The Mary Celeste, previously named Amazon, was found abandoned on December 5, 1872 in the Atlantic Ocean, 460 miles from Azores, Portugal. No one was on board. Rewind to the early 1860s, the Mary Celeste was built on Spencer's Island in Nova Scotia, Canada. It was first launched on May 18, 1861. During the voyage, the captain contracted pneumonia and died. Then in 1867, the ship was damaged in what they called run aground in Cow Bay, Cape Breton Island. A ship is run aground when the water is no longer deep enough to float it and becomes stuck. So the ship didn't have a great start. In 1868, Richard W. Haynes purchased the boat, which became the Mary Celeste. He made changes to the ship, and eventually it was sold again. A group then purchased the ship, and soon Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs joined them. So now we move to the mystery of the Mary Celeste. With Captain Briggs at the helm, the Mary Celeste set sail from New York City on November 7, 1872. Loaded with 1,700 barrels of alcohol and 10 people on board, the ship headed across the Atlantic Ocean to Genoa, Italy. However, the boat would never make it to its destination. It wouldn't even technically make it to Europe. In the log, the last entry was on November 25, 1872, and they were close enough to Azores, Portugal, that they could see land. 10 days later, on December 5th, the ship was found empty. The boat was discovered by David Morehouse, captain of the Degrada and David. He wanted to check in as he knew Captain Briggs. What he and his crew found was pretty eerie. There was no one on the boat. There was about 3 feet of water in the ship, which may be concerning to non-boat people. However, according to our research, 3 feet of water couldn't be enough of concern for a crew to abandon the ship. The longboat was missing, but all the alcohol was there except for a few barrels, and there was plenty of food. It was also noticed that the topmast sail was torn and the pumps had coal dust and debris in them. The entire situation was very strange. Why would a ship in seemingly good condition with a manageable amount of water be abandoned, especially with abundant food and alcohol? Furthermore, there was no signs of foul play. So the next step for Morehouse was to take the ship to collect salvage payment. They wanted to collect payment for finding the ship, so they took it to Gibraltar. Now it seems a little suspicious to arrive at a company asking for salvage payment regarding a ship that has no signs of destruction and appears in fairly good shape, except for the missing crew. So the salvagers' response to them was, "How do we know that you just didn't murder everyone on board and come to collect the payment?" So an inquiry was launched by British Attorney General Frederick Solly Flood. In the end, they couldn't determine any foul play involved, and the crew of the Degrada received the salvage payment, but only 1/6 of it. This seems to imply that they didn't completely bleed the crew of the Degrada, but they couldn't prove anything. The question is, what likely happened? The circumstances were strange, because the ship was in fine shape, and nothing else except the people and a longboat were gone. One explanation is that it's likely that the captain thought the ship was sinking. As we mentioned, there was about 3 feet of water, and that's not enough to make a captain worry about the boat sinking, but there was a sounding rod on the deck, and the ship's pump had been disassembled. A sounding rod is a tool used to see if the ship is taking on too much water. So it's possible that the ship's pump had been working, and they couldn't tell how bad the water situation was, so they took the longboat thinking the boat was sinking. and the bad weather was how the crew met their end off the ship. There were so many barrels of alcohol on the ship, and some of them were missing, so perhaps there were alcoholic fumes that worried those on board that there might be an explosion, and they left the ship. It was unlikely to be pirates, considering there was too much loot on the ship and none of it was missing. It was never discovered how the crew of the Mary Celeste disappeared. But the ship did have another infamous event when it found its way to Captain G.C. Parker, who intentionally crashed the ship in 1885, hoping to collect the insurance payment. It really seems to come back to payments with this ship. However, like the crew with the Grata, the payment did not go as planned when the ship did sink. No one really gets a happy ending in the story, not even the boat. The RMS Queen Mary was christened on September 26, 1934, and made its first voyage on May 27, 1936. The famous 1,000-foot ocean liner was known for its speed. It made it across the North Atlantic in record time. She also served as a vessel to transport troops during World War II. The Queen Mary earned the nickname the Grey Ghost during the war because it was painted gray to camouflage it in the mist and fog. She conducted several voyages from Europe to the United States and Canada to bring over 22,000 war brides and their children to their husbands and fathers. There were 13 of these bride and baby voyages, as they were called, in 1946. In the 1960s, transatlantic crossings by boat became less necessary as air travel became more affordable and accessible. So during this period, it became a cruise ship. However, it wasn't the most optimal ship to serve in this capacity because it didn't have air conditioning or outdoor pools. So in 1967, the Queen Mary took her last voyage. However, if you're interested in seeing the ship in person, you can stay there because it now serves as a permanently docked hotel in Long Beach, California. If you're booking a room on the Queen Mary, we suggest you avoid the boiler room, which is supposedly haunted. People in the boiler room smell smoke, even though no one in there is smoking. People also hear growling. The phenomena are attributed to a ghost called Grumpy. Another ghost believed to haunt the boiler room is that of John Henry. Henry was a young man who lied about his age to get a job on the ship. Tragically, he was killed when he was crushed to death while trying to escape a fire. In boiler room number 4, people have reported seeing a little girl sitting quietly. No one is sure who the child is, but sometimes she is seen sucking her thumb, and she's sometimes seen with her doll. There is even some speculation that the boiler room has a gateway to a parallel universe or different dimension. So if you want to stay in this universe and dimension, we advise avoiding Queen Mary's boiler room. As the name suggests, the Timor ground shark is found in the Timor Sea, which is part of the Indian Ocean. It's just north of Australia. The first recorded sighting of the shark is by Willie Ley, who wrote about it in his book The Lungfish and the Unicorn, which was published in 1941. The Timor ground shark looks very similar to a great white shark. However, a great white shark is about 14 to 16 feet long, and the Timor ground shark is much longer at 18 to 25 feet long. Also, unlike the great white shark, and other sharks for that matter, the Timor Sea ground shark does not have a dorsal fin. Sharks have a dorsal fin to help them remain stable while they swim and change direction. This has led people to believe that if the Timor Sea ground shark exists, it likely doesn't swim much and stays at the bottom of the sea. The Timor Sea ground shark supposedly doesn't have a very picky appetite. Since it stays at the bottom of the sea, it doesn't have a dorsal fin, it most likely lays away for prey to come to it. It will basically eat anything that comes its way, whether it's fish or human. The Timor Sea ground shark also has many similar characteristics to carpet sharks. Carpet sharks are bottom dwellers and eat whatever comes their way. However, carpet sharks have dorsal fins and are only about 10 feet in length, so they are considerably shorter than the Timor ground shark. Some have theorized that this shark is a very long wabagon shark, which is a carpet shark from the Australian-Indonesian family of sharks. But since there have been so few sightings of the Timor ground shark, no one knows for sure what it is. They were huddled in the conning tower, which is the cylindrical top of the submarine. 7 cold, sea-splashed German submarine sailors, aghast at what they were seeing. Minutes earlier, the crew of the U-28 Schmidt had been celebrating. Their torpedoes had found their target, the British steamer SS Iberian, off the southwest coast of Ireland. The Iberian didn't have a chance as it went down that day, July 30th, 1915. As the ship listed and began to sink, the submarine surfaced, and those 7 crew members, including skipper Baron von Forstner, emerged to watch it go down. They were not more than a few hundred feet away, but as the Iberian disappeared below the choppy waters, something incredible happened. Unbelievable, some might say. Seconds after it sank, the Iberian's boilers exploded underwater, which is not an uncommon occurrence. But the force of that explosion brought something to the surface, brought it above the surface. The German seamen watched in awe. Among the wreckage flying into the air was a creature. As von Forstner wrote 18 years later, this creature had a long, tapering head and a long body with 2 pairs of legs. Its length may have been some 20 meters. In shape, it was more like a crocodile than anything else. He also observed that the creature had webbed feet, a long snout, and a pointed tail. According to the skipper, this croc-like sea monster rose 80 feet into the air and then splashed down on the surface of the North Atlantic. The U-28's crew, including its chief engineer, its navigator, and its helmsman, watched as it writhed and struggled amidst the Iberian's wreckage. Then, slowly, it submerged, never to be seen again. Even upon the Baron's revelation years later, there was skepticism. Some wondered why he waited so long, 20 years, to report the incident. Believers have pointed out that decorated sea captains prone to wild imaginations perhaps would quickly lose their commands. Others who believe the story wonder if there is a scientific explanation for the sighting. Some people believe what they saw that day were the prehistoric Morosaurus or Pliosaurus, possibly surviving and living deep in the Atlantic. One noted cryptozoologist speculated that what the crew had seen was a Madaria ridgedid, essentially a dinosaur crocodile. But those creatures' fossils have shown them to have fish-like tails, not pointed ones like the Baron saw. Could the creature's fishtail have been blown off by the underwater explosion? Either way, Baron von Forster admitted that the sighting happened so fast no one on the conning tower had time to get a camera. But what of those 6 other crewmen at the Baron's shoulder who also bore witness to the creature? These men were named by the Baron in his report. They were Dykman, Ziemer, Romes, Paurich, Maas, and Bartels. Unfortunately, or perhaps conveniently for the Baron, all those men died during the rest of the war, never able to refute or corroborate their captain's incredible tale. At the turn of the 20th century, the Great Lakes were the busiest freshwater shipping lanes in the world. The region's booming industries, especially steel, lumber, coal, and grain, relied heavily on fleets of steam-powered freighters like the Bannockburn to transport raw materials efficiently between ports. Ships had technologically advanced by 1902. Many ships were built from steel rather than wood, with powerful steam engines that allowed larger cargoes and faster trips. However, with ships becoming more advanced, wireless telegraph was still in its infancy on the Great Lakes. Most ships could not send distress signals quickly or reliably. If trouble struck suddenly, crews often had no way to call for help. The SS Bannockburn was a Canadian steel-hulled freighter built in 1902 by the Collingwood Shipbuilding Company in Ontario. At about 422 feet long and 50 feet wide, she was typical of the steel bulk freighters that moved vast amounts of cargo across the Great Lakes in the early 20th century. Her main cargo was grain, lumber, and coal, essentially materials fueling North America's growing industries. In November 1902, the Bannockburn was loaded with wheat and departed Port Arthur, Ontario, bound for Midland, Ontario. The ship was commanded by Captain George Thorpe, an experienced mariner. The weather on Lake Superior was notoriously unpredictable and harsh during the late fall, and this journey would become one of the lake's most enduring mysteries. Without modern radar or GPS, ships relied on charts, compasses, and lighthouses, which could be obscured by snow or fog during storms. The SS Algonquin, another steamer on Lake Superior that day, was one of the last vessels to report seeing the Bannockburn. Captain Alexander MacArthur of the Algonquin reported spotting the Bannockburn near Whitefish Point during a snow squall on the afternoon of November 21, 1902. He noted that the Bannockburn was struggling against heavy snow and gusting winds, but appeared seaworthy. The two ships briefly exchanged whistle signals before the Bannockburn vanished into the storm. Captain MacArthur described the weather as, quote, "the worst snow squall I've ever seen on the lake," unquote. A little while later, the Bannockburn passed Whitefish Point, Michigan, under severe weather conditions with heavy snow and high winds in effect. The lighthouse keeper stationed at Whitefish Point, Michigan, reported hearing the whistle of a large steamer late in the evening on November 21st. Given the timing and direction, it is widely believed that this was the Bannockburn signaling as it attempted to navigate the hazardous waters near the point during the storm. The keeper described the whistle as low and intermittent, lost amid the howling winds and crashing waves. There were no visual sightings due to the blizzard conditions, but the sound was distinct enough to be noted in the log. After that, she was never seen again. Despite extensive searches, no wreckage was found. The ship simply disappeared without sending a distress call, and none of the 22 crew members aboard survived or were ever recovered. The Bannockburn quickly gained a reputation as the Flying Dutchman of the Great Lakes due to reported sightings of a ghostly ship matching her description in the years following her disappearance. Witnesses claimed to see a large steamer with a red smokestack sailing silently through the fog or heavy weather on Lake Superior, only to vanish without a trace. One captain reported a sudden apparition of a ship sailing silently on a foggy night near Whitefish Point, which vanished as he approached. Another sailor claimed to see the spectral ship near Isle Royale during a heavy snowstorm, only to have it disappear behind a wave. These accounts contribute to Bannockburn's legend as the Flying Dutchman of the Great Lakes. These sightings fuel local legends and ghost stories about the ship doomed to sail the lake forever, a ghostly reminder of the dangers of Great Lake navigation. The exact cause of the Bannockburn's loss remains unknown. The harsh weather of Lake Superior in November likely played a major role, with heavy snow squalls and sudden storms causing visibility and navigation problems. Some theories suggest the ship may have struck a reef or suffered a catastrophic structural fail in the storm's heavy seas. Incidents like the Bannockburn's loss eventually pushed for improvements in ship design, safety protocols, and wireless communication, though significant advances took decades. The Great Lakes consist of 5 massive freshwater lakes located in North America on the border between the United States and Canada. They consist of Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. Together, they form the largest group of freshwater lakes in the world and contain about 21% of the world's fresh water. They are of great importance for transportation of goods between the two countries. But with all the importance of the Great Lakes for the countries, mysteries surround them with disappearing airplanes, ships, and even people. Paranormal activity seems to be heightened around those shores. On the rocky eastern shore of Lake Huron, near the lonely stretch between Point O'Barg and Presque Isle in Michigan, locals speak about the voices. Not birdsong or the wind rustling the birch leaf, but whispers. These faint, distant, persistent voices seem to be calling from beyond the veil. For generations, fishermen, hikers, and campers have returned from that shoreline changed. Some refuse to speak of what they heard. Others insist it was the sound of people speaking just out of earshot. And a few swear it was a loved one's voice who has been long dead or hundreds of miles away. But all agree the whispers come from the lake. Long before colonists ever stepped foot in the region, the Anishinaabe Bay people lived and fished along Lake Huron's coast. They knew the lake's moods and mysteries intimately, and they warned of a place near the shore where the water spoke. According to oral traditions, the area now known as Thunder Bay was the site of a great battle between rival tribes centuries ago. The fighting was brutal, and many warriors drowned while fleeing across the bay during a violent storm. The elders believed the spirit of the dead had been trapped by the storm, unable to reach the afterlife. One elder's tale, passed down through the generation, tells of a young mother who lost her husband and son in the battle. For days she walked the shoreline, listening for their voices. On the third night she heard them whispering from the lake, quote, "We are here, come with us," unquote. She was never seen again. The place became known as the Shore of Lost Echoes. In the mid-1800s, fur traders and lumbermen began to settle near the Thunder Bay and Saginaw Bay areas. They too reported hearing strange voices near the water, especially on still nights or during the seasonal changes in fall and spring. For those who have stood on the dark shoreline, it's more than an illusion. Over the years, many have tried to explain the phantom whispers of Lake Huron. Temperature inversions and swifting wind patterns may carry sound across great distances, making conversations from boats or distant campers seem nearby. Underwater acoustics could amplify or distort natural sounds. Some believe it's tied to geological features like limestone formations emitting low-frequency vibrations or infrasonic noises. Paranormal theorists insist it's a spiritual phenomenon, a lingering echo of lost souls, shipwreck victims, or ancient warriors. But the truth remains as elusive as the voices themselves. Each summer, hundreds of campers and beachgoers visit the eastern coast of Lake Huron. Most come and go without incident, but occasionally someone walks out to the edge of the water at dusk and hears something unexplained. The SV Zebrina was found abandoned on September 17, 1917, on its way to Saint-Pierre, France, with lots of coal. But first, let's go back to 1873, when the ship was launched at Whitstable, England. The ship was built with the express purpose of transporting meat in the River Plate area. The ship fulfilled this need because it was shallow enough for the area with shallow waters, and only 5 people were required to run the boat. Fray Bentos had the world's largest slaughterhouse, and it was near the River Plate. So all this was perfect, except for one little feature. There was no refrigeration on board, and the boat was super slow. And if your purpose in life is to transport fresh meat, a slow boat may not be the path to success. So the SV Zebrina was required to pivot, like many of us do, when we no longer seem fit for our jobs. Instead, the ship was moved to the Mediterranean, where the routes would be shorter. On September 15, 1917, Captain Martin left Falmouth in the United Kingdom, heading towards France with coal. The boat was at sea for only 2 days when it was found in the French port of Cherbourg in the English Channel. When a rescue crew approached and went on board, they found the ship was fine, but there was no one on board and no immediate reason for being abandoned. In fact, the ship seemed to be in good condition. So we have another ship that was seemingly abandoned by a crew for no reason, leaving the ship in fairly impeccable condition. And again, what happened to those on board was never discovered, but there are a few theories bandied about. The most important factor in the historical context of this voyage was that the year was 1917, which meant Europe was at war. World War I, in fact. The war began in 1914 and would eventually end in 1918. There are questions about whether the ship was mistaken for a military target as they were sending fuel, i.e. coal, to France. Perhaps everyone on board was captured by a German U-boat. However, the ship's condition differed from how other ships captured by German U-boats were handled. For one, they would have sunk the ship with torpedoes. Although some have posited that the shallow, flat bottom of the boat ultimately saved the ship because the torpedoes were too low to hit it. There are also questions that perhaps they didn't have time to sink the ship once they kidnapped everyone and moved them onto the submarine. However, this theory has been disputed as, normally, they would have taken the ship's logs to prove that the deed was done. However, the log for the SV Zebrina was still there. Finally, the last question mark was that there is no record on the German or Allied sides of this kidnapping occurring or an attack on the Zebrina, and there normally would have been. So, again, no answer to what happened to the people on this boat. Let's travel from Japan all the way to Cuba. That's where we'll find Cuba's sunken city and a competitor for the title of Atlantis. When it was discovered in 2001, media outlets leaned into the Atlantis angle with headlines like Atlantis discovered in Cuba and Lost City of the Caribbean found. Cuba's sunken city is a group of stones that are over 2,000 feet underwater. While the structure is found in Cuba, its discovery is credited to two Canadians, Pauline Zelinsky, a marine engineer, and her husband, Paul Weisenweg. Together, they own a company called Advanced Digital Communications, or ADC. They were exploring the waters off the west coast of Cuba when they found something interesting on the ocean floor that didn't seem to belong to the rest of the natural environment. What they found was a setup of rocks that looked as though they were organized in a deliberate fashion. Some rocks were organized one on top of the other, while others could be found a little further away from the rest of the group. The rocks were also found in various shapes, including pyramid-shaped and circular. Among the shapes, some rocks were as large as 8 feet by 10 feet. Zelinsky and Weisenweg initially found the structure using sonar equipment underwater while on a survey mission in cooperation with the Cuban government. On the second visit, when Zelinsky and Weisenweg went to Cuba, they brought along geologist Manuel Iturrad. Iturrad is a senior researcher at Cuba's Natural History Museum. On this expedition, they used a remotely operated vehicle to investigate the rocks further. Iturrad, as well as Zelinsky and Weisenweg, all agree that this formation is not naturally occurring, and it was likely man-made. For his part, Iturrad claims that the formation is not something for which he can offer a real geological explanation. Zelinsky claims that the rocks were leftovers from an old culture from the region, but could not provide any conclusive evidence to support this claim. That being said, Iturrad also claims for this rock formation to sink as low as it has underwater, it would take around 50,000 years. This puts a wrench into the theory that people made it. As Iturrad states, at that point in history, when the formation would have still been above water, they would have had the tools available to create something like this. Archaeologist Keith Fitzpatrick Matthews says that if the structure is from the Pleistocene era, often called the Ice Age, the formation would only be about 100 meters underwater, so it's unlikely that it's from that period as well. Some "it's not a natural formation" arguments have included theories about lost civilizations. One such theory connects the formation to legends from the Maya and the native Yotoko people. They believe that their ancestors lived on an island that seemingly disappeared. The story existed long before the formation was found, so you never know what could have been passed down with oral history. Ultimately, the origins of this formation also remain unknown. For over a century, eerie, unexplained lights have danced across the waters and skies of Lake Erie. These lights are seen especially near the shore of Presque Isle, Pennsylvania, and Cleveland, Ohio. Sometimes they hover, sometimes they dart, sometimes they vanish without a sound or without a trace. Locals call them the Lake Erie Lights. Fishermen, pilots, lighthouse keepers, and beachgoers have seen them. Scientists have tried to explain them. UFO investigators have chased them, and still, no one knows exactly what they are. The first recorded account dates back to 1867, when sailors on the schooner the Caledonia spotted what they described as glowing orbs above the waterline, hovering and spinning in silence. Thinking it might be another ship or lanterns on shore, they signaled, but received no reply. The lights blinked out after several minutes. Through the late 19th century, similar sightings were recorded in shipping logs from Erie, Buffalo, and Sandusky. Many described glowing spears, orange or white, that floated low over the lake, then shot upward into the clouds. These were decades before electric lights or airplanes. At the time, people blamed everything from maritime spirits to celestial omens. One of the most famous encounters occurred on July 31st, 1966, near Presque Isle State Park. A group of teenage campers were stranded on the beach after their car got stuck in the sand. As they waited for help, a bright glowing object descended from the sky and hovered over the tree line. They described it as a large, silent, dish-shaped craft emitting a soft hum. Suddenly, something slithered out of the woods. They described it as a tall, humanoid figure with glowing red eyes. The teens fled in terror and were later found hysterical by park rangers. One of them had scratches on his arms he couldn't explain. The Air Force classified the report as a hoax, but UFO researchers continue to cite it as one of the most compelling cases of UFO entity interaction. In the 1980s, a wave of sightings along the southern Lake Erie shoreline triggered a media frenzy. Residents between Cleveland and Erie reported seeing strobing, red, green, and white lights that hovered motionlessly for hours. Reports of crafts all appeared to enter and exit the water. Also, silent formations of lights moving in triangular or circular patterns. In 1988, local Cleveland TV station WJW broadcast home video footage showing a bright white orb moving erratically across the lake. The footage was analyzed by meteorologists and dismissed as possible temperature inversion or the planet Venus. But many viewers and some experts were not convinced. The National UFO Reporting Center received over 60 reports in one 6-month span in 1988 from the Lake Erie region alone. One of the most outspoken modern witnesses is Michael Lee Hill, a musician and UFO researcher from East Lake, Ohio. Beginning in the early 2000s, Hill claimed to have reported close encounters with lights over Lake Erie, sometimes visible right from his backyard. He recorded multiple videos showing intense glowing orbs hovering and blinking in patterns. The footage gained traction on History Channel's UFO Hunters and Ancient Aliens. Hill later claimed that the lights were extraterrestrial surveillance vehicles, possibly drawn to the lake's freshwater reserves or electromagnetic anomalies. Hill's experiences remain controversial. Some view him as a whistleblower, others a hoaxer. But the lights in his videos are still unexplained. Many explanations have been offered for the Lake Erie lights, but none fully account for their behavior. Swamp gas like methane can produce eerie glows, but they are short-lived and rare over water. Temperature inversions can cause distant lights to appear closer or to float, but they don't explain the movement or intelligence some witnesses described. Some believe the lights are linked to classified military aircraft or drone testing over the Great Lakes, but there are no military bases close enough to consistently explain sightings stretching over 150 years. Lake Erie, like Lake Michigan and Lake Ontario, has localized geomagnetic disturbances that could interfere with instruments and possibly affect human perception. UFO investigators argue that the lights demonstrate non-human intelligence, especially given their evasive maneuvers and interactions with aircraft. Some believe that the lights are drawn to fresh water, either for monitoring or for harvesting purposes. Today, reports of the Lake Erie lights continue. Most are dismissed by authorities, but locals on the shore, especially in Vermilion, Avon Lake, and Erie, still watch the skies at night. Some even gather with lawn chairs and cameras, hoping for a glimpse. The disappearance of the pleasure craft Saba Bank has become firmly etched in the lore of the Bermuda Triangle. But even if you're not prone to the unknown, as they say, you have to admit that the yacht's vanishing still tickles the feel-good places when it comes to unsolved true crime. Here's what we know. It was a beautiful, cloudless Sunday, March 10th, 1974, in the Bahamas. In a slip at NASA's Yacht Haven Marina sat the Saba Bank, a brand spanking new 54 DeFever luxury cruiser. With a price tag of $300,000, or about $1.8 million today, the boat had all the bells and whistles when it came to emergency equipment. Radio locator beams, radar center, self-inflating life rafts, motorized dinghy, the works, and just about every type of radio available at the time. Skipper Cyrus Sedner was feeling pretty confident when he pulled out of the marina that Sunday with friends Elliot Cohen, John Turquino, and Raphael Kaplan along to lend a hand. Though Sedner didn't own the yacht, it belonged to Raphael's cousin, Manuel Kaplan. He knew it well, and also knew the waters along their 125 route to northeast Coconut Grove, Florida. It was to be the Saba Bank's first and final voyage. When the boat didn't show up to the Dinner Key Marina in Florida 2 weeks later, Manuel called the Coast Guard. Yet, despite the locator beacons on board the vessel, no trace of her was found in the days after her disappearance. Then, 13 days after it left port in the Bahamas, a Miami marina said it received a radio message from Tarantino to his family, telling them he was okay and for them not to worry. Someone later reported seeing the Saba Bank and her 4-man crew in Jamaica, but nothing further was ever substantiated. The Coast Guard embarked on a search in conjunction with the Bahamian Air Sea Rescue Service, but the search was called off on April 26. As one Coast Guard spokesperson told the Miami News, "We put a considerable amount of work into locating this vessel, with no result." Flyers went up all over Florida's many marinas. Manuel Kaplan, the owner of the yacht, was offering a $2,500 reward for information. He later upped it to $25,000. There were no takers, but plenty of theories. The first, of course, is bad weather. However, there were no storms reported in the area, and the yacht's route took the 4 men pretty much along the coastline in no more than 50 feet of water. Even if she sank, rescuers would have been able to see the sunken remains from the air through the Caribbean's crystal clear waters. Eventually, a story surfaced speculating that the Saba Bank was the target of some kind of insurance fraud. They pointed out that kind of fraud could explain why insurance company Lloyd's of London refused to pay Manuel Kaplan when he submitted his claim. But in truth, Lloyd's was refusing to pay out because it had a right to, because Manuel Kaplan's insurance policy had no clause for piracy. During the 1970s, dozens of luxury yachts went missing in the Caribbean. The Miami Herald newspaper counted no less than 44 boats that had vanished between 1971 and 1977. Many of those disappearances were gleefully chalked up to the Bermuda Triangle, which saw its popularity at its highest during the decade. The Coast Guard didn't think that the boat was mysteriously lost in the Bermuda Triangle. "We are not impressed," one guard spokesman told the Orlando Sentinel, with supernatural explanations of disasters at sea. At least 2 bastions of the 70s letters were inclined to agree. The first was the muckraking reporter Jack Anderson, one of the newsmen on Nixon's enemy list, and the second was future Floridian novelist Carl Hiaasen. Now primarily known for his neo-noir books, back then Hiaasen was an investigative reporter for the Miami Herald. He's the journalist we mentioned who counted 44 missing yachts in a 7-year period, and his reporting pinned the Vanishings squarely on the shoulders of hijackers, specifically drug smugglers. In an expose published in 1977, Hiaasen added the Saba Bank to the list of missing luxury cruisers such as the Feisty, the Pirate Lady, the Hedonist, and the Sea Wind, all suspected victims of hijacking. Jack Anderson reported that night prior to the Saba Bank's departure, DEA officials in the marina spotted 2 known drug smugglers loitering around the marina, near where the Saba Bank was docked, bringing a weird 70s vibe to the idea of the Pirates of the Caribbean. But jokes aside, what is often lost in the telling of the story of the Saba Bank, triangle theory or not, is the very human toll. Raphael Kaplan's wife, Jane, told the Miami News in 1974, "This is very nerve-wracking for all of us. A lot of families are very upset." Then she added, without prompting, "Yes, I have heard of the Devil's Triangle." In the vast forested lake district of northern Patagonia in Argentina lies Lake Nahuelito. The alpine lake of glacial origin, deep and expansive, its water stretching across the Andean foothills beneath snow-clad peaks. It lies partly within the vast expanse of the Nahuelito National Park, Argentina's oldest national park, first designated in 1934. The lake's shoreline bears islands, peninsulas, deep coves, and arms. Complex terrain carved by ancient glaciers and later shaped by moraines and fault lines. It was in these mysterious, quiet depths that locals, travelers, and even scientists began to speak of a creature of the deep, a lake monster, which came to be called Nahuelito. The legend is not recent. Indigenous stories, colonial reports, and modern sightings all feed into its lore. In the summer, when the lake is calm or when the wind dies in some sheltered bay, locals claim to see dark humps move beneath the water. Some describe it as a serpentine neck raising like a swan's, then dipping again. Others claim they saw a long, undulating body or twin humps breaking the surface. One 1910 account by a man named George Garrett described a creature that was 5 to 7 meters visible above the water, protruding some 2 meters from a vantage point roughly 400 meters away. Over decades, the creature's reports grew. Some described it as a giant water snake with humps and fish-like fins. Others likened it to a swan-neck creature with a small head and long body. The range of the supported lengths was wide, from 10 meters to as much as 45 meters in some retellings. In one of the most cited early investigations, around 1922, Clement O'Neilly took an interest and sponsored expeditions to seek evidence of the creature. Some modern sightings claim clear photographs or videos, though none have been accepted by mainstream science as proof of an unknown creature in the lake. From a scientific point of view, claims persist but remain unconfirmed. No specimen has ever been captured, and no indisputable photograph exists. There has never been a peer-reviewed zoological paper that has confirmed a new, large aquatic animal in the lake. The lake is large, but still a relatively enclosed basin. Many experts ask, what would sustain a large predator or large reptile in those waters, especially when the lake's ecosystem has known trout, cold alpine condition, and seasonal fluctuations? Yet the legend refuses to vanish and now has been woven into the region's character. In this Patagonian basin, the name Nahuelito invokes respect for nature's mystery, for landscapes remote and wild, for the unanswered question in deep, cold water. While the creature may or may not swim beneath the waves of Lake Nahuelito, the legend is real. Kiryat Yam, a quiet Israeli town near the banks of the Mediterranean Sea, made headlines in 2009 for sensational reasons. Locals and tourists flocked to the beach because there had been mermaid sightings. Over several months before sunset, a half-woman, half-fish creature performed tricks and then disappeared into the water. One of the first people to see the mermaid, Shlomo Cohen, said, quote, "I was with friends when we suddenly saw a woman lying in the sand in a weird way. At first I thought she was just another sunbather, but when we approached she jumped into the water and disappeared. We were all in shock because we saw she had a tail." Unquote. There were so many sightings by many different people in the area that the local government got involved. They offered a reward of $1 million for photographic proof of the creature. NBC film crews set up cameras on the beach for a week, filming day and night and underwater. In one instance, cameras caught a human figure appearing only to dip back into the water and disappear. The film crew chased the figure but could not catch it. The team sent the footage to the Center for Coastal Ocean Research in Los Angeles, California. The center's director, Michael Schadt, reviewed the footage. Although he could not definitively say it was a mermaid, he said it could be a viable option. However, the reward also garnered negative attention. The Mermaid Association in Brooklyn, New York threatened legal action in the International Court of Justice for, quote, "badly and outrageously damages to the legendary mermaid legacy," unquote. Over 15 years later, the $1 million reward has yet to be claimed. Pilots call it puddle jumping. A short flight in a small airplane in a remote region. They happen thousands of times a day. Some would say they're routine. But the puddle jump pilot Dennis Collier took on July 3, 2021 was anything but routine. When he took off from the Schoolcraft Municipal Airport in Michigan on July 3, 2021, Collier, like most pilots, expected an uneventful flight. Collier planned to fly south over Lake Michigan and touch down in Boyne City, Michigan. But his plane somehow ended up on the bottom of the lake. Time seemed to slow down, Collier told the Traverse City Record Eagle, recalling the moments before the accident. Collier was lucky. He survived, but hundreds of others haven't been so lucky. Between 1964 and 2018, a staggering 873 planes have crashed in Michigan. The deadliest of those happened in 1950 when Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 slammed into the lake. At least, the DC-4 was presumed to have crashed. Authorities found no wreckage, and no trace of the 58 souls who perished on the flight. But the Michigan Triangle, pointed from Ludington to Benton Harbor in Michigan and to Manitowoc, Wisconsin, doesn't only claim airplanes, it claims ships too. At least 1,000 of them, dating back to the mysterious vanishing of the French fur-trading vessel Le Griffon and her crew in 1679. Despite repeated efforts by maritime archaeologists, no trace of Le Griffon has ever been found. As writer Steve Moresh wrote in 1961, there are probably more ships sunk on Lake Michigan than all other Great Lakes combined. The worst of these wrecks came in 1847 when the steamship SS Phoenix went down, bringing some 200 immigrants down with it. A ship called the Delaware out of Sheboygan, Wisconsin, steamed to its rescue, but it was too late. 7 years later, the Delaware itself would join the Phoenix at the bottom of the lake, along with its 11-man crew. But you don't have to be on the water or above it to experience the effects of the triangle. Case in point, the strange disappearance of Steve Kubacki. In February 1978, Kubacki was a 23-year-old college student at Michigan's Hope College. While on a group ski trip to Saugatuck, Kubacki simply vanished. Authorities used dozens of officers and a helicopter in a search for the young man. But the only thing they found were his footprints, which flatted a 200-yard-long line in the snow and then suddenly stopped on the shore of Lake Michigan. A sad case, the rescuers thought. He must have wandered onto the ice and fallen through. And that was the official story, until 15 months later, when Steve Kubacki suddenly reappeared. On May 5th, 1979, Kubacki awoke in a field near his father's house, 700 miles away in Massachusetts. He had no memory of that missing year and a half. I didn't feel like I had been gone that long, he told UPI, surrounded by his family, but I'm beginning to understand. What could account for this strange phenomenon of frequently crashed vessels and disorientation? Some believe that Stonehenge is to blame, or at least the Wolverine State's own version of Stonehenge. Discovered in 2007 by Dr. Mark Hawley, Michigan Stonehenge is a mysterious, some say unnatural, rock formation on the bottom of Lake Michigan, near the middle of the triangle. Also known by its more scientific term, the Grand Traverse Bay Stones, the formation consists of a mile-long stretch of submerged boulders ranging in size from that of a soccer ball to that of a small car. All these prehistoric rocks are arranged in a peculiar pattern, standing out in stark relief of the lake's sandy bottom. Given that England's Stonehenge has been given an array of mystical and metaphysical powers over the centuries, could it be possible that these boulders in the lake have the same powers? The power to affect magnetic fields, navigation, and even space-time itself? Whatever the answer, you may want to put Lake Michigan on your permanent no-fly list. Two rooms that seem to be rife with ghostly activity are staterooms B340 and B474. Many people have reported hearing someone knock on the door in the middle of the night. Bathroom lights are turned on and off without any human intervention. Housekeepers have seen the faucet running in the washroom even when no one is staying there. There have also been reports that the phones in the staterooms ring early in the morning, but when people answer, there's no one there. It seems like there are good reasons these rooms are haunted. In 1948, in room B340, British third-class passenger Walter J. Adamson died. It's unclear what caused his death, but many people believe he's still haunting that room to this day. One such report of an encounter with the ghost of Adamson occurred in 1966. A woman who was sleeping in the room said she was awoken when the covers were pulled off her. When she looked to see what was happening, she saw a man standing at the end of her bed. She screamed, and the man disappeared. People also supposedly died in room B474. When the James family was staying there in 1959, the patriarch, Peter, murdered his wife, 4-year-old daughter Dana, and 2-year-old daughter Penny. In some variations of the story, they were all strangled, and Peter shot himself. In other versions, Dana was shot instead of being strangled. The ghosts of both girls are seen in the room and throughout the ship. They often call out for their mother. Sometimes they ask other children to play. Then finally, there's the Lady in White, also known as the White Lady. Over the last 50 years, she's been the most frequently seen ghost on the Queen Mary. She's dressed in a long, white evening gown, which makes sense given her name. The story goes that the White Lady boarded the ship when it was sailing from New York to Southampton with the final destination of London. Besides being seen in the stateroom, her ghost is also seen dancing without music in the Queen's salon. The shipwide call came from the third officer of the SS Nestor. It was almost like that classic movie trope. He said, "Sir, you better come up here. There's something you need to see." Commander John Webster excused himself from brunch and headed up to the bridge. As he went, he could hear whisperings from the passengers on the deck. There was definitely something amiss. And when he arrived at the bridge at 10 a.m. on September 11, 1876, the skipper could plainly see what the fuss was about. The Nestor was a steamship, so its cruising speed was about 11 miles per hour. But swimming right along the Nestor's starboard side was a creature, matching the speed of the vessel, darting and diving through the surf. At first glance, this sounds like a whale of a tail, but since when are whales yellow? Besides, as Webster wrote in a letter to the Straits Times newspaper, this creature was unlike any whale he'd ever seen. A, quote, terrible-looking monster, unquote, he said. It had a yellow square tail that was 12 feet wide and cylindrical black and yellow striped tail that was covered in scales, like that of a dragon in a fairy tale book. Its body was green and yellow and had no fins, flippers, or legs. The captain called the ship's surgeon, John Anderson, to verify what he was seeing. The doctor saw it too and was equally astounded. Indeed, the Nestor's passengers had begun to line the ship's railing as word spread about the amazing creature swimming beside them. For a half hour, nearly the entire ship's contingent observed the marine monster. One witness noted that it seemed to leave an oily substance in the water as it undulated through the waves. After a while, the creature dropped back behind the Nestor, but then caught up with the ship's port side. It showed no sign of fear, Captain Webster wrote. Then it dropped back again and swam off, disappearing under the surf, while the Nestor continued on its journey from Calcutta to Liverpool. Dozens of witnesses, all with ample time to view the creature, confirmed the sighting, and all agreed with Captain Webster and Dr. Anderson's physical description of the monster. But not all could agree exactly what they saw. Some said it resembled a massive 45-foot tadpole. Others said it was more akin to a 60-foot salamander. Theories abounded at the time, and have ever since. One camp claims that the Nestor encountered a Kalanidae, essentially a massive sea turtle. But that might not explain the thing's freakishly long tail. In 1980, one marine biologist wondered if what the Nestor encountered that September day in 1876 was not one creature, but millions. He postulated that Webster and company had seen a massive school of sea cucumber larvae that happened to be in the shape of a tadpole. Those creatures do secrete an oily substance. But the trouble with that theory is the speed at which those little guys had to be swimming. And they don't really swim. Another theory is that the ship had become unknowingly ensnared in a downed, hot air balloon and it was dragging it along the water. Not out of the realm of possibility. Hot air balloons were a favorite hobby and sport of the era. But this wouldn't explain why the so-called creature wasn't observed nestled right up alongside the ship's hull. Perhaps the best theory came shortly after the Nestor account was published in the newspapers around the world. In a letter to the editor, one seaman wrote in to say that he once observed a massive water snake while sailing in the same year in the same area. The snake had wrapped itself around a whale, and the sailor watched as it crushed the whale to death. The man wrote the ribs of the ill-fated fish were distinctly heard cracking one after the other, with a report like that of a small cannon. A giant anaconda-like sea snake able to crush a whale to death? If that's not a sea monster, what is? Let's swim over to a different corner of the world, Mexico's Sea of Cortez, which is also known as the Gulf of California. It's home to the mysterious, anonymously named Black Demon Shark. In Spanish, it's known as El Demonio Negro. It was allegedly first spotted in 2008. As the name suggests, the black demon shark is black. Estimates have put it to 20 to 60 feet long, and it weighs somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 pounds. For some reference, large gray white sharks are 20 feet long and can weigh about 4,000 pounds. The black demon shark's tail is reportedly so long that it creates waves. Many people, mostly fishermen, have stories about encountering the shark. The black demon shark has allegedly knocked boats over, eaten a group of fish in one fell swoop, and even attacked whales. While many have claimed to have seen the shark and even shared stories of their experiences, there isn't any photographic or video evidence to support their claims. Many believe that when people see what they think is the black demon shark, they are actually seeing another very large fish. The Sea of Cortez has a lot of different sharks. There are more than 170 species that call the sea home. One theory is that people are seeing a hypermelanistic great white shark. A hypermelanistic great white shark has darker skin, which would explain the color of the demon shark. Other people think it might be a whale shark, which can be as long as 60 feet. So the longest fish on Earth, and they do fall into the length range people have reported about the black demon shark. However, whale sharks are non-predatory. They only eat really small fish and krill, so it's doubtful that they would have attacked whales. People have also argued that the black demon shark is really a manta ray. Manta rays can be 23 feet across, and the top of their bodies are black. The problem is that they are wide and not long. They also don't have a large tail that can make waves. One last fish that some people believe it could be is the prehistoric megalodon. But this is very unlikely because it's believed that megalodons went extinct 2.5 million years ago. Regardless of what it is, the fish is terrifying fishermen in Mexico and wreaking havoc in the Sea of Cortez. In Norway's Telemark region, the long, narrow glacial lake known as Lake Seljord lies sheltered among the wooded hills and quiet shores. The water of the lake stretches for roughly 13 to 15 kilometers and in places reaches significant depth. For generations, locals have told of a creature living in those deep waters, a serpent-like beast known by the name Selma. It is said that the first known written account of Selma comes from the year 1750. On that day, a man from the nearby parish of Bow was rowing across the lake from Ylvanus to Ness. According to the report, his boat was surrounded by moving mass in the water, which caused alarm. From then on, stories grew. In 1786, a priest, Hans Jacob Wiley, wrote of a strange creature in his book, Descriptions of Seljord's Priesthood in Upper Telemark. He described the being as moving underwater like an eel, wrapping around a man who had been carrying a barrow across Laxall River. Many accounts describe Selma as having a long, snake-like body, sometimes with a head likened to a horse or a moose, or with a mane. Some said it had humps, or that it appeared on quiet, hot summer days when the lake surface was still. For the people of Seljord, the legend has become part of the town's identity. In 1989, the municipality adopted a coat of arms showing a gold-colored sea serpent on red background, symbolizing Selma. Over the years, dozens, perhaps even hundreds of claimed observations of the creature were made, though none have produced definitive proof. One source mentions more than 100 sightings. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, cryptozoologists attempted to document the creature more rigorously. For example, Swedish cryptozoologist Jan-Ove Sundberg and his organization worked in the lake using sonar and other devices, but without obtaining questionable evidence. Despite the lack of scientific confirmation, the legend has persisted and the community embraced it. Today, visitors to the lake can climb a 17-meter high sea serpent tower on the lakeshore to scan the water. On a calm summer morning, one might walk to the Lake Seljord and imagine the creature just beneath the surface. The scientists in the 1990s found pings and shadows on sonar, yet these were never confirmed as living beings. The size and food supply of the lake raised doubts. How could a large serpent survive in such a body of water? Some scientists assert that the lake is simply too small to support a creature of the size reported. Yet the legend remains, whether real or myth. While the historical accounts of Selma began in the mid-18th century and continue through anecdotal reports to the present, no specimen, no clear photograph, no scientifically verified trace has yet settled the question of what lies in Lake Seljord. It places Selma at the meeting point of folklore, nature, curiosity, and the unknown. In the end, Selma remains both imagined and anchored in local identity, a serpent in the lake, a symbol on the coat of arms, a tale to tell children and visitors alike. Whether she swims in the cold depths of the Seljord Vatnet may be unknown, but the legend remains very much alive. While Western lore has the Devil's Triangle, Eastern tradition has its own version of the vile vortex, called the Dragon's Triangle. As the legend goes, back in 1274, Mongol conqueror Kublai Khan and a fleet of ships set sail to invade Japan. But once the navy entered the Devil's Triangle, nearly all the ships went down, along with some 44,000 soldiers. The triangle was thought to protect the island nation from invaders. That was until it turned on the Japanese. From 1949 to 1954, the country was at a loss to explain the loss of 10 fishing and military seagoing vessels. So began to study this Pacific Bermuda Triangle to see what might be the trouble. On September 24, 1952, authorities of the Hydrographic Office launched a research ship called the Kyomaru No. 5 to enter the Dragon's Triangle and report back what they found. It never reported back. Investigators were puzzled. The seas had been calm, with no foul weather recorded. Though the Kyomaru had 150 tons of oil on board, there was no oil slick on the water's surface. There was also no radio SOS. 22 crew members and 9 scientists were presumed lost at sea. In the ensuing years, theories have cropped up as to the fate of the Kyomaru and his crew. Was it sideswiped by a larger U.S. military vessel in the dead of the night? Was it torpedoed by a Soviet submarine? Pulled down by a giant squid? One magazine surmised that it was sunk by extraterrestrials living on the sea floor in an alien base. With no real answers, the Japanese government quarantined the Sea of the Devil from ocean vessels of any kind, which made things a little difficult for a while, given that the area is only 100 kilometers from Tokyo. Modern-day examinations into the phenomenon, however, don't tend to focus on the storms above the surface, or giant squids, or maritime accidents. Rather, they delve below, where volcanic activity has been recorded on the seafloor or on the Nambo Bonin island chain. In 1987, a report by the New York Times revealed that at the time of Kyomaru's vanishing, an island 75 miles to the north of its last known location recorded a tidal event, or tsunami in the area, most likely caused by an undersea volcano. Could the rolling conditions of the ocean in this area be chalked up to eruptions and seismic events below? Author Larry Cusick thinks so. In 1995, he wrote a book called The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved, in which he lays the blame for the Kyomaru's sinking on that undersea volcano recorded in 1952. Unlike many ships that disappear without explanation, however, the Kyomaru was eventually found. Well, pieces of it anyway. And while the discovery put an end to some of the wilder theories, it also failed to fully put to rest a core reason for the sinking in the first place, and the loss of its 31 souls. The next shark monster, the Luska, is found in the Caribbean, around the Bahamas, Florida, and Belize. This species is certainly the most terrifying on our list. It's been described in several ways. Some people say it's a combination of a shark and an octopus. Others say it's half squid and half eel. Some say it's a dragon, or it's some sort of monster with many heads. People have also said it's an evil spirit. According to most descriptions, it has sharp teeth and tentacles with suckers. The Luska has been described as being able to change color to camouflage itself. Estimates put it at around 75 feet up to 250 feet in length. For some perspective, the blue whale is the largest animal on Earth, and they are 100 to 110 feet long. The Luska is often found around blue holes in the Bahamas, specifically the islands of Andros and Exuma. Blue holes are underwater cave systems, and they are open at the surface of the water. They have tidal currents, and they can pull people in. There are several notable encounters with the Luska. One man claims to have been swimming close to a blue hole, and he was grabbed and pulled under. Luckily, he lived to tell the tale, but said he had sucker marks on his thigh, and that's where he felt he was being pulled. An underwater photographer claimed he was attacked by a creature with tentacles that was around 50 feet long. He survived the attack, but apparently the creature stole his camera. A story from some divers truly illustrates the Luska's strength. These divers were trying to catch the Luska with their traps. Instead, their boat was taken for a ride when something got a hold of one of the traps and dragged the ship. Sadly, many swimmers and cave divers have ventured too close to the blue holes and were never seen or heard from again. Many people believe that they were victims of the Luska. There are also several tales about the Luska's origins. Some say it was a woman who drowned and turned into this horrible creature. Other stories say it came from an underwater society. Another legend claims that the Luska is the spirit of a human sacrifice. Some have said that the Luska is an evil spirit, and it looks like the worst fear of the person being attacked. Amazingly, there may even be evidence of the Luska. This includes a glob of mass that washed up on the shore in St. Augustine, Florida in 1896. Many people thought that this was a dead Luska, or at least part of it. Another event occurred in January 2011 when the head of a giant octopus washed up on the Grand Bahama Island in the Bahamas. The octopus had a giant head, but since the head had only washed up, the fishermen surmised that the rest of the body was likely 20 to 30 feet long. Ultimately, some wonder if the tales of the Luska's size are completely true, and if they are the descriptions of it appearing like an octopus accurate? Because no octopus can grow to the size described. However, the Luska may be a yet unidentified or undiscovered species of octopus with the head of a shark. Maybe it can be explained away as the ocean being so big, and we have yet to discover all the creatures that call it home. Regardless, it seems that fishermen in the area take the possibility of the Luska's existence very seriously, and they try to be very quiet and not make a sound as they pass blue holes. The big question is whether the Timor Sea ground shark, the black demon shark, and the Luska exist. Whether the stories that witnesses tell are true, or if they saw a creature that does exist, and in the heat of the moment, and they thought they saw something bigger and more fantastical than what was really in front of them. Maybe they're all tales that fishermen tell each other. Or maybe they are real creatures that exist, and one day we'll have proper evidence and analysis of what they are, and all these stories will be legitimized. The Carol A. Deering was found abandoned on February 4th, 1921, on the Diamond Shoals near North Carolina, United States. It's been referred to as the ghost ship of the Outer Banks. Going back to April 1919, the Carol A. Deering was built in Bath, Maine. It was named for the owner's son. Made for commercial use, this ship was considered fancy for a cargo ship. It was made of oak and mahogany. It was 255 feet long, 44 feet wide, and it weighed 1,879 tons. It was not only the largest ship made by the G.G. Deering Company, but it was also the last. On August 22, 1920, Carol A. Deering left Norfolk, Virginia to head to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. At the time of departure, the captain of the ship was Captain William H. Merritt, and his first mate was his son, Sewell Merritt. However, the two didn't last long on the trip. No, they didn't disappear without a trace. The older Merritt, Captain William H., got sick. The ship stopped at Lewes Harbor, Delaware, on August 26, 1920. The captain and his first mate both left the ship. Little did they know that at the time the captain getting sick was the luckiest thing to happen to him at that moment. Still having to deliver coal to Brazil, the ship hired a new captain, Captain William B. Wormel, and a new first mate, Charles B. McClellan. They left to continue their journey to Rio de Janeiro on September 8, 1920. It turns out that not all was well on the ship. The new captain and first mate weren't exactly meshing, shall we say. During the cruise break, Wormel met with another captain, George Goodwin, who told him the crew wasn't trustworthy. He felt that the only person on board he trusted was Herbert Bates, the engineer. Despite the personnel problems on board, they did make it to Rio de Janeiro. The crew left Brazil on December 2, 1920, and headed to Bridgetown, Barbados. At this stop, Wormel met with yet another captain, Hugh Norden. Wormel again expressed his concern with the crew, but specifically identified his first mate, McClellan, as a particular issue. Wormel described to Norden that McClellan treated the crew poorly and often drunk when they went ashore. Another captain asked Wormel if he was worried about a mutiny. Wormel was confident that the entire crew wouldn't turn on him. McClellan also vented to Norden about his own frustrations with Wormel. He felt that Wormel was overstepping his bounds when it came to McClellan disciplining the crew. He was quoted as saying, "I'll get the captain before we get to Norfolk. I will." Which may have made Wormel think twice about getting on the ship with him again. There may have been an opportunity for Wormel to rid himself of McClellan when the night before they were set to leave Barbados, McClellan was arrested for public intoxication. But Wormel, for some reason, thought he should bail McClellan out of jail, and he did. Maybe Wormel thought that McClellan would be grateful or something. But considering on this video we're discussing ghost ships, we're sure you knew that wasn't the likely case. The ship left for the United States on January 9, 1921. On January 29, 1921, the ship was seen from a Cape Lookout Shoals lightship off the coast of North Carolina. Someone on board called out to the lookout that they lost their anchor in a storm and needed to notify the G.G. Deering Company. At that moment, the lightship's radio wasn't working, so they were unable to contact the company. The lightship's master was Thomas Jacobson, who later described the encounter. He said the man who called out to him had reddish hair and a Scandinavian accent. He also noted that the crew was on a quarterdeck, and apparently this is something that they're not typically allowed to do. So the whole situation was a little suspicious. On January 31st, 1921, the ship was seen on the edge of the Diamond Shoals by C.P. Brady. At the time, no one could go near the ship because of poor weather conditions. Finally, on February 4th, 1921, a crew headed by Captain James Carruthers boarded the Carol A. Deering. And like every ship on the list, they didn't find one soul aboard. However, this ship was in pretty bad shape, unlike the other ships. Since no one could approach the ship due to the storm, it was just sitting there in bad weather conditions. The boat was in bad shape, the navigation book, all the crew's items, and lifeboats were missing, but there was food ready to eat. So an investigation was launched by the Department of Commerce, the Department of Justice, the Treasury Department, the State Department, and the Navy. And despite all these investigations by these departments, a firm conclusion was never reached as to why the ship was abandoned. There are many questions and theories. Was it the weather, pirates, rum runners? Was the mutiny due to the clash of personalities due to the captain and his first mate? Who was the red-headed guy who called out to the lightship? Records show that it wasn't the captain, and there was no red-headed man part of the crew. Furthermore, the red-headed man told the lightship that the ship had lost both anchors, but it turns out that, despite the bad shape the ship was in when it was found, both anchors were present. Also, the sails were up, and it's common to take them down when leaving a boat. There was another ship in the area at the time, the SS Hewitt. One theory is that due to the weather conditions, everyone on board abandoned the ship and was saved by the SS Hewitt. The distress signals were lit on the Carol A. Deering, but the Hewitt never recovered. There's another theory that Russian Bolsheviks stole it. This was during the Red Scare periods, and many rumors where communist mutineers were circulating. However, the theory was debunked, considering the boat was still there. They would have stolen the boat for this theory to work. So it looks like another occasion where xenophobia isn't the answer. Another theory is that it could have been the Bermuda Triangle. Another theory is that there was a mutiny. One piece of recovered evidence that supports the theory that there was a mutiny on board the Carol A. Deering was when a fisherman named Christopher Columbus Gray found a bottle on the shore of Buxton Beach in North Carolina on April 11, 1921. The message inside the bottle reads as follows: Deering captured by oil-burning boat, something like chaser, taking off everything, handcuffing crew. Crew hiding all over the ship, no chance to make an escape. Finder, please notify headquarters. Deering. When they came to lake, Lulu Wormel, the captain's daughter, wanted to find whose handwriting matched the handwriting in the note. She went to the crew's family and found that the handwriting most resembled that of Herbert Bates. Remember him, the engineer, and the only person on board that the captain seemed to trust? Could this be the answer? While the handwriting likely matched that of Herbert Bates, it seemed to match that of Christopher Columbus Gray's better. And sure enough, he fully admitted to writing the note because he was hoping for a little fame and a job at Captain Hereda's light station. However, obviously, this did nothing to solve the mystery of what happened aboard that fateful day. Ultimately, the Carol A. Deering was dynamited on March 4, 1921, and the case was closed in 1922. The mysteries of each of these boats will likely never be resolved. Only those on board know what happened, and unfortunately, they took their secrets with them when they went missing. The SS Leaffield was a steel-hulled Canadian steamer that was 262 feet long, and it was built in 1912 in Toronto, Ontario. She was a workhorse of the Great Lakes, designed to haul heavy bulk cargo. By 1913, she had already proven her durability on Lake Superior's unpredictable waters. For much of her career, she transported grain, coal, and manufactured goods between Canada and U.S. ports. In the fall of 1913, she was engaged in a project far from her usual cargo runs. She was hauling construction supplies and equipment to Port Arthur, now part of Thunder Bay, Ontario, to aid in building breakwaters and piers. On the morning of November 9, 1913, the Leaffield set out from Port Arthur with her barge, the Benjamin Noble, lashed alongside. The goal was to return to her home before the worsening weather made the lake impassable. Lake Superior was already restless that November, but as the Leaffield steamed eastward, the weather turned violent. The notorious Great Lakes storm of 1913, also called the White Hurricane, was sweeping across the region. Winds over 70 miles per hour tore at the ships, and blinding snow made navigation nearly impossible. Somewhere between the Angus Rocks and the Porphyry Point Lighthouse, the Leaffield and her barge were seen by a lighthouse keeper fighting the waves. That was the last confirmed sighting of the vessel. When the storm cleared days later, some parts of the boat began washing ashore. Broken timbers, twisted metal, and lifebelts imprinted with Leaffield. Bodies of several crew members were recovered on nearby shores, but the ship itself had vanished beneath the lake. In total, 18 crew members and one passenger perished. Among them were Captain John H. Jackson and his wife, who had joined the voyage. For decades, the exact resting place of the SS Leaffield remained unknown. Unlike some Great Lake wrecks that lie in shallower, clear water, the Leaffield supposedly sank in one of Superior's deepest and most remote areas. The area's underwater currents and cold darkness make exploration difficult. Theories emerged about how the ship disappeared. Some claim the Leaffield struck Angus Rocks in the blizzard, tearing her hull. Others believe she foundered in open water when a wave snapped the tow lines and overwhelmed her. Still others suggest she may have broken apart mid-leg, with the largest sections never resurfacing. Today, the SS Leaffield is remembered as one of the most haunting losses of the Great Lakes. The wreck has never been located, even though shipwreck hunters occasionally mount expeditions in hoping of finding her. Somewhere in the deep, cold silence of Lake Superior, she still lies. Usually, going to the pool at your hotel is a good time to relax as you swim or sit by the poolside. But the Queen Mary's pools are a little bit more active than that. The first-class indoor pool is supposedly a hotbed for paranormal activity. While visiting the first-class pool area, you can hear people splashing around the water, even when no one's in the water. You may also hear wet footprints passing by, but no one is there when you look. Other reports include a young girl with a teddy bear and people seeing ghostly women hanging around the pool wearing 1930s-style swimsuits. There is also an account of a woman who looks to be in her early 20s, and she's wearing clothes that were fashionable in the 1960s. The woman is silent as she walks down the stairs and then vanishes into thin air. Similarly, there's another account of a woman in a tennis skirt who walks down the stairs and disappears. There are also the ghosts of a woman wearing a white dress and a little boy in a suit sitting by the pool. Someone said that they saw a young girl who appeared from a cloud of steam, and the little girl was wearing a blue and white dress. One odd thing about the first-class pool is that paranormal activity is commonly associated with someone dying in the area that they haunt, but there are no reported deaths in the first-class pool area. But perhaps they aren't ghosts, but apparitions from a different dimension or universe. Like the boiler room, some people believe that the pool and changing rooms in the pool area are vortexes. Bill Sonder, who worked on the Queen Mary, said he was once pulled into this vortex. He said he was on the ship one day while it was docked in California. He said suddenly he was instantly transported back to winter 1966 in New York, just before the ship's last voyage. He noticed that the crew looked depressed, and he realized that they must be sad because they knew soon they would be out of a job. Then, almost as quickly, he was returned to the present day. There's another pool on the ship, the second-class pool. Tragically, a young girl, known only as Little Jackie, who was 5 or 6, drowned in that pool. Supposedly, her ghost haunts the pool area where she died. It sank. Of course, that's the knee-jerk reaction when thinking about any vanished ocean vessel. But the circumstances surrounding the mysterious disappearance of the USS Cyclops in 1918 definitely warrants a deeper look. The Cyclops was a collier, a cargo supply ship that was in service at the height of the First World War. It carried fuel, coal, ore, and even mail to various U.S. naval ports of call. In its brig, there were 3 U.S. military prisoners who had been court-martialed and were U.S. bound to await their lifelong imprisonments. Also confined to the lower decks were 24 German prisoners of war. Those prisoners added to the total of 309 men on board when the Cyclops left port in Barbados on March 4, 1918, en route to Baltimore, Maryland. It was never seen again. Even a century later, it remains the largest non-combat loss of life in U.S. naval history. There were no SOS messages picked up anywhere. During a massive search for the ship, no debris was found on the surface, and there were no lifeboats launched. No bodies were ever recovered, and nothing ever washed up on shore. Not a wooden bucket, not a cork life preserver. Modern searches for the vessel on the ocean floor have also come up empty. In 1968, the Navy divers swore they found the wreck, but when the Navy asked to see it, the diver couldn't find it again. In the 100-plus years since its vanishing, various theories have been put forth as to the ultimate fate of the Cyclops. Blame first centered on the cargo. On its final voyage, the Cyclops was charged with transporting magnesium ore used in munitions manufacturing. One theory states that during high seas or a storm, the cargo shifted would cause the ship to list and eventually sink. But one former sailor on the Cyclops, who disembarked at its last port of call, said that the load would not have been enough to affect the ship's balance. However, that survivor, Conrad Nervig, wrote in 1969 it might have been possible that the ore was stored improperly, because, he said, the officer in charge of the cargo had also been thrown in the brig by the ship's captain, George Worley. The disagreement between the officer and the captain was trivial, at best, but Worley nonetheless confined him to the brig for the duration of the journey. Later, it was discovered that during his postings before the Cyclops, Worley routinely had his officers arrested and jailed for even minor infractions. That brings us to another theory, mutiny. Nervig recalled Captain Worley as being unfriendly, rough, and eccentric. In the dead of the night, the commander would step out into the brig wearing his long underwear and a jaunty derby hat. With his ornate cane, he would bark nonsensical orders to the crew before returning to his cabin. Worley was also a notoriously poor navigator, but woe be the soldier who questioned his orders. Once, Worley even had an officer executed on the ship's deck for disobeying orders. His men reportedly hated serving under him. Could the captain's last command have been one too far? Had the crew of the Cyclops taken charge of the vessel, only to steer it into infamy? Perhaps the crazy captain committed Grand Theft Cyclops, hiring the ship for his own personal use. In the days before he left port in Bermuda, Worley made naval heads turn with an unusual request for extra coal and food supplies, way more than needed for such a modest trip to Baltimore. U.S. Consul Brockholst Livingston granted the request, if only to stop Worley from pestering him. After it left port, a British patrol ship passing the Cyclops noted it was miles off course, and insisted on leading it back to its correct one. This happened twice over 24 hours, the day before the Cyclops' last sighting on March 9, 1918. Another deep dive into the story discovered that George Worley was born George Wickman in Germany. One of the VIP passengers, Alfred Gottschalk, the Consul General of Rio de Janeiro, was notoriously pro-German. Had the captain and the Consul General turned coat to personally deliver the Cyclops and its magnesium ore to the Germans? Worley's wife, when hounded by the press on this theory, made an impassioned plea that her husband had been a U.S. naval officer for 28 years. She insisted that he, quote, hated Germany, unquote. But back to that magnesium ore. During a world war, that was considered precious cargo, valuable to any country's war effort. Another theory postulates that a German Special Forces team boarded the ship at some point, killed the crew, and took over the helm, bringing it and its ore to Germany. For its part, that country immediately denied this, and there's no evidence the Cyclops has ever been found there. Oh, and as for the theory that the Cyclops was simply torpedoed by a German submarine, U.S. intelligence for the month leading up to the vanishing reported no German naval presence in the area where the Cyclops disappeared. And there were no reports of minefields in the area. This leads us to yet another theory, the dreaded Bermuda Triangle. The Cyclops' last known voyage led straight through that infamous dead zone. On June 14, 1918, the U.S. Navy officially declared the Cyclops and his crew lost at sea. But a year later, along a beach in Long Island, New York, a beachgoer picked up a corked bottle off the sand. Unplugging the cork, the man found a rolled-up note, a message in the bottle that said the Cyclops was safe and sound, and listed its coordinates for the location. For its part, the Navy ruled that the note was a hoax, and never even bothered to check it out. The coordinates of the message were never made public. Today, the official line for the U.S. Navy is that the disappearance of the ship has been, quote, one of the most baffling mysteries in the annals of the Navy. All attempts to locate her have proved unsuccessful, unquote. It was discovered to be an enormous serpent. So began the official report of Captain Macquay to his superiors in the British Royal Navy in 1848. Macquay had been in command of the HMS Daedalus, sailing the South Atlantic about 300 miles off the shore of South Africa, when a midshipman alerted him and his officers to the creature. In his report, Macquay described the creature as able to keep its head and shoulders 4 feet above the water while swimming. He estimated it as 60 feet long and had come close to the ship's hull that, as he put it, if it had been someone I knew, I could easily recognize his features. He described its colors as dark brown with yellowish white around his throat and added that it had no fins. There was also something running down the back of the creature, like a horse's mane, though he did add that it could have been seaweed. The others on the ship saw it too, and later backed up their captain's description of the creature. The hubbub might have ended there had Macquay's report not leaked to the London press. Just 6 days after the Daedalus returned to port, the Illustrated London News published an exhaustive account of the sea monster sighting, accompanied by professional engravings drawn with the input of the good captain. Soon after the newspaper hit the stands, biologist Sir Richard Owen, who incidentally coined the term dinosaur, wrote an article deriding the whole affair. Obviously, he wrote, the creature was a common elephant seal. But Captain Macquay angrily rejected Owen's dismissal. He knew what an elephant seal looked like, and this was not that. The Navy was also angry and embarrassed, and Captain Macquay was seldom heard from again. You think that given the ridicule sprayed upon Macquay after his report, other British sea captains might be hesitant to go on the record with further sea monster sightings. You'd think that, but you'd be wrong. 50 years after the Daedalus debacle, British naval captain R.J. Kringle reported a sighting of his own while aboard the steamship Umfully. On December 4, 1893, also off the coast of South Africa, Kringle and his men reported seeing a creature darting through the water alongside their vessel, keeping match with the ship's speed of 11 knots per hour. According to Kringle in his report, it was at least 80 feet long, with shining skin and a snake-like shape. Its head and neck rose 15 feet out of the water as it swam. Kringle told his first mate to use binoculars to confirm the sighting. The first officer did, and reported the creature had an enormous mouth with great rows of teeth. Kringle then noticed the creature was pulling ahead of the ship, so ordered the helmsman to speed up to catch it. When the creature passed 14 knots, Kringle gave up, watching as the serpent sped through the water and away. Like Macquay before him, Kringle also drew up an official report of his sighting and sent it to his superiors in London. He regretted this almost immediately, and he carried that regret for the rest of his life. In 1929, a full 36 years after his creature encounter, Kringle reportedly told a friend he'd been ridiculed for all those years. I wish that anybody else had seen that sea monster rather than me, he said. He went on to explain that his superiors told him he'd actually seen everything from a school of dolphins to a floating island of seaweed. But, Kringle said, if an island of seaweed can travel at a rate of 14 knots an hour, or a string of dolphins can stand 15 feet out of the water, then I give in and confess myself deceived. In the waters of the Okanagan Lake, British Columbia, the legend of Ogopogo is known to residents and tourists alike. Known to the region's First Nations, the Silex Okanawan Nation, as Nakatik, meaning lake spirit or water demon, the creature has since been woven into regional folklore, tourism, and popular culture. Okanawan Lake stretches about 135 kilometers in length and in places reaches depths exceeding 200 meters. The valley in which it sits was carved by glaciers, and the lake basin was formed after meltwaters filled the depression some 10,000 years ago. Its shores are framed by forested hills in the communities of Kelowna, Vernon, Picton, and others, stretching along the Okanawan Valley. Into these deep waters, stories of Ogopogo are created. The size, depth, and relatively isolated character of the basin provide the kind of setting in which legends can grow. Long before settlers arrived, the Silex Okanagan Nation told the Nakahik residing in the lake. In those traditions, the spirit was neither simply an animal nor a monster. It held power over waters, and safe passage required respect. Some accounts say that travelers offered small animals before crossing to appease the Nahatik. One folkloric version says that the creature began as a man, Kiryat Yam, who murdered an old man and was transformed into a lake serpent, sentenced to live in the waters forever. In any case, the indigenous stories are of sacred waters and a spirit to be heeded, not simply a cryptid to be hunted. The name Ogopogo emerged later. Around the 1920s, a music hall song became popular in British Columbia, calling him Ogopogo. The name stuck in the public imagination, replacing or at least overlaying the older indigenous name. Today, the creature is often referenced by both names. By the late 20th century, the creature had become a regional mascot, featuring merchandise, tourism, promotions, and even a submerged statue in the lake. The modern legend of Ogopogo is built on dozens of reported sightings. Most describe a serpentine, dark-hulled creature rising from the lake in a series of humps, a body many meters long, sometimes described with a horse-like head or horns. One of the earliest non-indigenous encounters dates back to around 1872, when settler Susan Allison reported seeing something large and moving in the lake. In August 1968, a tourist named Arthur Folden captured approximately 60 seconds of home movie footage of something large and lifelike moving in the lake near Peachland. In 1926, a newspaper reported that people in 30 vehicles parked at the Okanagan Mission Beach observed a long, dark creature with multiple humps moving steadily across the surface. While these reports are intriguing, none have produced undisputed proof. A 1991 expedition using remote-operated vehicles and mini-submarines explored the lake bottom, but found no evidence of a large creature. Scientists and skeptics offer alternative explanations for the sightings, like floating logs or timber wakes. Okanagan Lake has a history of timber industry use, and logs can look serpentine when floating in a row. Another theory is seishes and internal waves. In calm weather, layers of water of different densities can slide under one another, producing unusual surface waves that may resemble humps. Groups of otters or large animals can be misidentified when they travel together in groups. Despite these explanations, the legend persists. Part of its power is that it merges spiritual tradition, natural mystery, and human fascination with the unknown. In the valley of communities of Okanagan, the legend of Ogopogo is part of the identity. Tourists book boat trips just to glance at the lake and imagine the humps. A statue of Ogopogo lies 30 feet beneath the surface at Paul's Tomb in Knox Mountain Park. In 2021, the legal rights to the name Ogopogo were transferred to the Okanagan Nation Alliance, underscoring the importance of the indigenous heritage behind the legend. No scientific explanation has confirmed that a large unknown reptile or serpent dwells in the lake. However, the absence of proof does not entirely erase the possibility, especially in a lake so deep, so steep in places, with enough dim corners for imagination to wander. Some skeptics say the physics simply don't support a creature of the size claimed. Others argue that human memory and perception are unreliable, especially when an image of a lake monster already haunts the mind. In the spring of 1998, 43-year-old Jeff Leitcher was running Jack's Diving School, a scuba and snorkeling tour company in Kailua Kona, Hawaii. On April 12, 1998, Leitcher and his crew took 6 people out for a diving expedition. As they headed out to their diving spot, a school of dolphins began to follow the boat. Leitcher said, quote, Suddenly, one of the men on the port side starts yelling and pointing. I couldn't believe what I saw. There, not 10 feet from the bow, was what looked like a nude woman. She had long, flowing hair and one of the most beautiful faces I've ever seen. But there's no way a human being could swim so fast. She was keeping right up with the dolphins. Then she leapt into the air, and my heart almost gave out on me. The entire lower half of her was covered with scales and tapered back into a huge fish tail. She jumped once more, then disappeared under the surface. The other 10 people on board also saw the mermaid. They continued to make their way to an area in the ocean known as Hawaii Point for their diving expedition. It took them about an hour to reach the spot. Then they started diving. Leiter had an underwater camera with him. Leiter said, quote, "Suddenly, I felt something brush against my right leg. She shot by me like a streak of lightning, and then turned and came back past me, swimming the other way. I just aimed the camera and started snapping pictures," unquote. Leiter had the photographs developed, and one of them showed a shadowy figure of a mermaid. The story in the photo caught the attention of the tabloid, the Weekly World News. They said they had 3 independent photography labs inspect the photo. They said that the photo had not been tampered with or altered. Some people point to this photo as evidence that mermaids exist. However, not everyone is entirely convinced. The final formation on our list can be found about 650 to 1,300 feet off the coast of Israel and about 26 to 40 feet underwater. The entire area of this formation is 430,000 square feet, and it's believed to have been there since 8,880 to 7,550 BP. It was discovered in 1984 by Ulad Gali, a marine archaeologist. The formation includes a series of rectangular structures and walls in different positions. It also has a well-built stone wall that stretches 50 meters below the surface. There's another formation called a megalithic structure with 7 stones, each approximately 3 feet to 6 feet long, in a semicircle. 6 of the 7 stones are still upright today, yet another installation of 3 oval-shaped stones. Researchers have argued that this land was settled by Neolithic people from the pre-pottery Neolithic (PPNB) and the later pottery Neolithic period, before rising sea levels. The structure suggests that people here had an agro-pastoral marine way of life. Since the structures and formations were built before the rise of the sea level, many have given theories for how these structures were used. For example, the installation with the 7 stones seems to surround a freshwater spring, so it's likely it had something to do with the water, and some have suggested it was part of a water ritual. The well, for example, had bones in it, along with wood and stone. This has led to the question of whether it was used as a well or just a very long garbage chute. There's also a burial area in which there were 65 human skeletons, as well as bones from animals and fish. The formations may be explained as serving as places for animals to keep them from wandering off, or even dividers between the fields. The land at the time was fertile and grew wheat while it was still above water. All this paints a picture of a full society with animals in fenced-off areas, fields full of wheat, and a freshwater spring that would have been part of their daily lives. However, it's likely those who settled here and created these structures didn't remain long. It's highly probable that the people left as the sea level rose and they could not stay and maintain the community they built. But there are conflicting opinions as to what caused the structures to sink. One school of thought comes from Maria Parasacci of the Italian National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology in Pisa, who argues that the settlement sunk after it was hit by a tsunami caused by a volcanic collapse at Mount Etna. However, this has been disputed by some researchers who point out that the structure would not have collapsed and fallen over and remained there seemingly undisturbed to this day. They argue that the sea levels rose due to glaciers melting. Regardless of the truth, the formations were so structurally sound as they survived centuries of environmental changes to still be found upright underwater. It's likely, had the water levels not risen, it would have been possible to live there. The three formations on this list demonstrate two ideas depending on your position. If you believe they are human-made, these formations demonstrate the adaptability of humans to find ways to survive and make the environments around them function. However, suppose your position is that the structures are naturally occurring. In that case, this list demonstrates that environments are unstable and nature is just as powerful, if not more so, than humankind. And if you fall a little into column A and a little into column B, then this list illustrates that due to our constantly changing climate and landscapes, humans must continue to adapt as times change so we can continue to survive. The SS James Carruthers was a steel-hulled Great Lake freighter built in 1913 at the Collingwood Shipbuilding Company in Collingwood, Ontario. Commissioned by the St. Lawrence and Chicago Steam Navigation Company of Toronto, she was named after a Canadian lumber and grain magnate. Spanning 550 feet long, 58-foot beam, and 27-foot depth, with a gross tonnage of 7,862, she was one of the largest lake freighters of her time. Her powerful triple expansion steam engine and modern design made her a pride of the fleet. On November 6, 1913, the James Carruthers loaded 370,000 bushels of wheat at Fort William, which is now part of Thunder Bay, Ontario, and they were bound for Midland, Ontario, on the Georgian Bay. The trip was the ship's first voyage with cargo into the Great Lakes. The Carruthers was so new that when she left on her voyage, painted parts of the crew quarters was reportedly still tacky. Her master, Captain William H. Wright, was an experienced mariner who had guided ships through many storms. The vessel departed into early signs of worsening weather. On November 6, the Great Lakes were in the grip of the infamous storm of 1913. The White Hurricane was about to claim another victim. The storm had a massive system that unleashed hurricane-force winds, freezing spray, and snow squalls across all 5 Great Lakes. After leaving the St. Mary's River, the Carruthers and another freighter, the J.H. Schindel, steamed into northern Lake Huron. The Schindel eventually turned back, but the Carruthers pressed on, aiming south along the lake's eastern shore. The last confirmed sighting of the James Carruthers was in the early morning of November 9, 1913, heading down Lake Huron. Sometime that day she vanished without sending a wireless distress call. When the storm subsided on November 10th, grim evidence of her fate began to appear. Wreckage, lifeboats, hatch covers, and timbers washed ashore between Kincardine and Godrich, Ontario. These locations were far south of her intended route into Georgian Bay. Bodies of crew members, including Captain Wright, were found near Point Clark. Many were wearing life jackets and heavy coats, suggesting the crew had a warning of disaster, with no chance of rescue. Residents near Inver Huron reported hearing distress rockets and steamer whistles on the night of November 9th, possibly the Carruthers trying to signal for help in the blizzard. Despite her size and new construction, the Carruthers could not withstand the storm's combined force of massive seas, wind gusts over 70 miles per hour, and blinding snow. Many theories emerged of what they think happened to the doomed ship. Some believe course error into open lake after attempting to round the Bruce Peninsula. Others think because the ship was so new that it suffered structural failure from the heavy storm and waves. Also, some believe cargo shift from steel rails and wheat in rough condition caused the ship to sink. Along with the SS Leaffield, the Carruthers was more than one of the dozen ships claimed by the Great Storm of 1913, an event that remains one of the most catastrophic maritime disaster in the region's recorded history, with over 250 lives lost and 19 ships destroyed. The wreck of the SS James Carruthers has never been found, making her one of the most enduring unsolved mysteries of the Great Lake. Update: While this video was in production, the SS James Carruthers was found 190 feet below the surface of Lake Huron. On May 26, 2025, shipwrecker David Cotner and his team were mapping sections of Lake Huron when they discovered a vessel at the bottom of the lake's floor. They sent down cameras and read the name of the ship, confirming it was the Carruthers. The ship was upside down about 20 miles southwest of Harbor Beach. On July 27, 2025, 8 divers on Trotter's team went down to photograph the ship for the first time in over a century. A few items such as navigation light and smokestack from the stern have been broken off and lay near the wreck. Trotter and his team made the announcement that they discovered the SS James Carruthers on August 24, 2025. At the time of this recording, it's still unknown why the ship sank. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.